You'll have to forgive me. I'm going to read from my extensive notes here on how this happened. No offense, Doug, but you would have made a good city editor. Doug called me a few weeks ago and said, we need a journalist to talk about the Oroville thing. We're going to do these Western water stories, and we need somebody who's a journalist that can explain this. And I said, but Doug, I'm no longer a journalist. And Doug said, oh, that's all right. I was going to ask you to recommend somebody. And so then he said, oh, that's right, you were a journalist. Okay, so we got that out of the way, and then I said, but Doug, I don't know a lot about this topic. And Doug said, well, that never stopped you from writing about things in the past. And so I said, okay, well, that check was there. And then I said, well, how many people are going to be at this? It's not going to be the whole Water Congress, is it? And he said, no, it'll be one of the breakout sessions or something, and we're going to use a bunch of technology, and it'll be simple. And so here I am. Anyway, I did a lot of research on this. Kelly, if we can cue up the PowerPoint. I did a lot of research on it, and I was lucky along the way that I went to another water conference, and I happened to hear Christy Jones, who's the deputy director of the Department of Water Resources in California. And so she was explaining about the Oroville Dam, and I got a lot out of that presentation. And then I ran into Bill McCormick at this conference and talked to him a little bit about Colorado dam safety. So when I got everything together to put my presentation together the other night, then everything kind of came together. And then the next morning, Mark Scott from GHD Engineering came up to me and said, I'm from Oroville. So I'm going to bring Mark up here. Let's give Mark a big hand. And Mark, I got to tell a story about Mark. At the Southeast District a few months ago, we created a croquet course. Some of you might know about this, but it was our conservation person said, we have demonstration gardens at the Southeast District. And our conservation person said, well, if you're going to have turf, you should really play on it. And so I got to thinking, what could we do to play on the turf? So I built a croquet course, a regulation-sized croquet course. In May, we had our first ever benefit tournament to raise money. We raised $450. Now, if any of you want to contribute to this next year, Mark, save the date on your calendar. But anyway, Mark was the winner of the croquet tournament that we had, our very first croquet tournament. And he's from Oroville. So, on this, I did work for about 31 years at the Pueblo Chieftain and enjoyed most of my time there. It was probably 24 of the best years of my life. So I learned how to write news stories, and the reason Doug would make a good city editor is because they don't care if you know anything about the story, they just want you to go out and get the story. So I went out and got this story. Through my research, there were several ironies about that I noticed about this, and one was that a lot of the material used in construction of the Oroville Dam was the debris left behind from hydraulic mining in the mid-1800s, and that's a mining area. Mark, what kind of mining went on up there?
Well, there was a lot of gold mining, a lot of forestry. I moved there to Oroville when I was 2 years old. I was born in San Francisco and then moved to Oroville. I went to the same high school as my dad and my grandfather, and lived there hunting and fishing most of my life when I was growing up. And we went to a lot of old mining, and you can see the indication of hydraulic mining, and you see a lot of that up there. So that's very prominent.
Yeah, so one of the things that occurred to me was that when they built the dam, it actually mitigated some of the environmental damage that had happened from the hydraulic mining. The other thing was, it was always a controversial thing, but it was during flooding in 1955-56. I was about 1 year old at that time. And the flood control benefits, and this was something Christy Jones had pointed out at the conference I listened to her at, exceeded $1.3 billion in the period from 87 to 99. Since then, it's been kind of in a drought situation. And then there were fish hatcheries constructed as mitigation for this dam, and they raised about 10 million salmon and 450,000 trout each year. So some ironies that just kind of struck me as I did some research on this. The dam was constructed from 1961 to 1967, and it got derailed literally with train derailments, and then there was also some flooding that happened. Mark, when you were growing up, the construction was going on. What do you remember
I'm
about
not that old. No, actually, unfortunately, I am. But so let's see, I moved there in 1961, and I was pretty young at the time, but I do recall still, when you're real young, you don't remember a lot of the details, but I guess my reason for becoming an engineer might have had some foundation in this, no pun intended. I saw a lot of I still remember a lot of the equipment going up and down, because this is a zoned earth-filled dam, so I remember seeing a lot of that equipment and amazed at how they could navigate some of those slopes. There's probably some health and safety things they did back then that they wouldn't do today, but I saw a couple roll over, and I also saw some of the train derailments of that, so it was something stuck in my mind still today.
Okay, I'm not going to read all of the slides there. You can read those, but this is what Oroville looked like in the drought. And I was sharing some of these slides yesterday with Mark, and Mark was the one that suggested to me, well, this dam was like a poster child during the drought of what was happening to lake levels. And Mark, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was the predominant thing, and this is where a lot of the focus in the Northern California area. This is the start. This is really the head of the California aqueduct system. So a lot of the water that goes all the way down to Los Angeles starts up in the Oroville Dam. And this drought was, when you saw the pictures of the drought of California, of lakes, it was typically Oroville that was highlighted. And I'm looking right there. This is almost the view from my parents' back house that I moved to when I was 4 years old. They still live there. They're up on the ridge kind of behind this picture. And you can see the spillway there. That spillway is what you'll see later was part of the issues when we started getting the rain. I do want to, if you don't mind, give a couple statistics on the size of the dam. I don't know if you're going to touch on that.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Oh, yeah, are you? Yeah. Okay. I didn't get to see all this, so I'm kind of winging it a little bit. But that drought was huge, and this was the poster child.
You're the interviewee, and your job is to answer the questions.
Got it.
So, here's...
Is that your old journalism coming back?
No, that's revenge for the croquet tournament.
I got
you. This is how it looked in January of 2017, what it was designed to do. There's water going down the spillway in this photo, and the emergency spillway, if you'll remember from the previous slide, had never been used. So Let's see, Mark, why don't you give us some statistics about the dam?
Yeah, we coordinated this. You can see some of the numbers there, but if, I just kind of grabbed some numbers from just some of the reservoirs we might be familiar with here in Colorado. It's about 358,000 acre feet at Pueblo. I think Jerry Gibbons gave some of the numbers on the upcoming Glade and Chimney Hollow. Their Glade is 170,000, I believe, and 90,000 at Chimney Hollow. This is 3.5 million acre feet, so it gives you an idea of the size of this reservoir. And I spent a lot of time both fishing and water skiing on it, and you see the spillway there. The spillway is actually, I have to use my cheat sheet here a little bit. That is, I've got it somewhere. 150,000 cubic feet per second can come down that main spillway. So that gives you an idea of the spillway itself. And then there is 6 turbines inside the dam itself that generate about 820 megawatts. So that gives you an idea of some of the key features of that dam.
Right, and some other things, and these were things that Christy Jones had pointed out. One of Doug's other great ideas was that we would use Skype to interview somebody from California Department of Water Resources, but it's 7:30 in the morning out there, so I said they're probably all on their way to work, so we're not going to do that. So anyway, this is, you would have made a great city editor. And I'll get into my feelings on city editor and side conferences if somebody wants to, but anyway, it also provides water to 25 million people and irrigates about 756,000 acres, something like that. And it's also key to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta environmental restoration that's going on. There's agreements out there in California that deal with that. So it's a very important reservoir to the state. We're going to kind of go through the crisis, but this is an overview. This is out of a newspaper or news site or something. All of these slides, I violated probably every copyright law, so if bear with me on that. I don't know. I'm just waiting for them to sue me because it would be fun to be in court on a case like that. Anyway. So this kind of details what happened there. It was February 7th that the reservoir reaches maximum elevation. It was raining. There was rain in the forecast. It wasn't panic at that point. I think it was at that point, though, that I spent the last part of every day kind of looking through the internet to see what was going on with this, because if you weren't in California, there wasn't much in the media yet about it. And it had just kind of started happening on that day. And if you're like me, you were kind of glued to that screen the whole time saying, oh, well, what's going to happen today? It was for a while in our lives, it became more fun to watch something other than the president. And it wasn't fun. I kind of call it like, water porn or something like that, because it was, and then later it develops into the cult of Oroville because it becomes a much bigger thing in some circles. Anyway, as Mark mentioned, the flow on that spillway was designed to handle about 150,000 CFS in releases. When this started, they were already releasing 140,000, and that's what they thought the inflows would be. The inflows were much larger than that. This drains a very large watershed. The spillway was overwhelmed, and later reports came out that there were some parts of it that, because of undercutting and other things, that were only 4 inches thick, and much of it was unreinforced concrete. The final report on the exact causes of why it failed is due later this year, I believe. I don't know if they'll have it done then. And then Christy Jones, who I've been mentioning, was appointed the acting deputy director for DWR in January, and a month later she had this to deal with. And she said our choices were worse and worser, is how she put it. I listened to her talking in Santa Fe about 2 weeks ago. And when she was describing it, it was amazing, and I don't have the slides of that, but they took like a room that was probably 4 of these rooms large and set up a Jumbotron TV screen and a whole bunch of little TV screens around, and it became their incident command center. When they set up that communications center, they didn't have any experience in the Department of Water Resources to deal with something like this. So they set up they called upon the Fire Incident Command, which out in California had dealt with several large wildfires, and that became then their communications center. And they had they were inventing stuff on the fly. They had to find enough computers, enough cables and everything to get the news out on this. So it was a very big operation. Their main operational focus, and now this one, in this photo you can see the spillway, the emergency spillway has been breached there, and some of the hillside's been washed away, and then they had to release out of the main spillway again, even though it was already, had been a hole developing in it. So this is what it looked like at that point. The turbines were a main operational thing that they had to deal with, because with the turbines, if they were not operational, they couldn't open and close any of the other gates on the dam. And you had some observations about that yesterday, Mark.
Yeah, that's my dad was calling me every day, talking about what was going on. He said, no, there's no climate change. We got all our water back. So, that was his perspective. And but he did say that they weren't able to release water underneath the dam, which was a big deal, because that left them only with these 2 components. And that emergency spillway that you can kind of see to the ones, I guess, your left of the spillway with the water had never received water before. It had never had a release over that before, and became one of the real emergency areas there, as well as the fact that they realized after they started letting the water that they had never cleaned or removed any trees under there. Or did any maintenance down that side of that mountain. So it was ripping trees out, it was throwing those into the Feather River down below, and causing a lot of issues with potential blockage of waterways and flooding issues and concerns downstream.
And you told me something about from where your parents live, with all that water coming down. What was it like for them to not only to watch it, but...
Well, I even remember that as a kid. Had the large energy dissipators structures, concrete structures at the bottom of that spillway. You could feel the mist at my parents' house. So when this was going on, it was like it was kind of a constant rain in addition to the natural rain that we got at the time. So that was definitely impacting them directly. The only good thing is they're so high that they were about, where I grew up was about water level in the dam on the other side, so kind of behind us on this picture.
This is the aftermath. That's about 1.9 million cubic yards of debris that had washed down off the mountain. This was when they decided to turn off the spillway. One of the other thing that really surprised me when listening to Christy Jones, a really nice lady, but she was nervous there because she's away from this now in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it's still going on. And she stressed several times that this is still an emergency for them. They have to get the upper spillway repaired, which they totally blew out and rebuilt, and they're rebuilding, and we'll see some video on that later. We'll see there was so much debris out of there that they had to move so much of it back so fast. They had helicopters. I don't know if you remember the news reports, but helicopters, trucks, everything going 24/7 to get rocks back up on the spillway, because they really didn't know how they were going to fix it at this point. Here the work begins. That little hole up there is about 150 feet wide, 450 feet long, 30 feet deep. And they are using, you say it's a California dam, but they're using a federal loan for $500 million to fix it. And then in May, this is what the demolition looked like. They had to, not the dam, it should say parts of the spillway are blown up, but because the dam has never been in danger. So these are some big trucks. You look at the size of that truck compared to the man, and then I put the other photo in to show you the size of the trucks compared to the project that they're working on. They actually put these rocks in. The parts of the spillway that they blew up, they've recycled into concrete. So now I'm going to talk about how this has been covered. There's been a lot of stories in the mainstream media about it, and they've been good stories, and they give you an idea of what's going on, but there haven't been a lot of them. This is a guy named Juan Brown. He's a commercial airline pilot, and he's kind of my personal hero in this whole thing, because I watched a lot of his videos, and any of the videos that are telling me things, and at the end of this, hopefully we'll have time to show an official video about it, but his videos are very technically detailed, very accurate, and he's just made this an obsession. He must do one every day. He sits in on all of the state press conferences. He worked with a local newspaper to get a press pass. He uses his cell phone to take his picture in front of it like he is here, and just kind of gives a video report on what's going on. So I just found it fascinating to kind of watch what he does. And I put some figures up here that I thought were interesting, that one of his videos actually had about 400,000 views. And that's larger than 2 of the 3 major newspapers in that area that were covering this at the time. There's some other videos. This came off a site, and this is just something somebody made up. So I don't, it's kind of like a truth-checking page or something, but I don't know how they check anything. It's just his opinion about what was said. So he's saying for some reason that, and then people argue back and forth in the comments on these, and they're fun to read too. And a lot of them say, if you really want to know what's going on, go over to Juan Brown's site. They don't say go to the Sacramento newspaper, go to the San Francisco newspaper. No, they say go to Juan Brown's website. So it was fine. And other sources are really not helpful. You look at this photo and they just write in, wow, and that's kind of like how it is around my office when I call in my engineer Garrett sometimes, and Garrett will look at it and go, wow, So that's just our version of reacting to this. But here's some of the things that they talk about. There's a green spot on the dam, so the dam's going to fail. Well, the green spot's been there forever. It's just a place where grass happens to grow, and then the grass dies. The dam will collapse because the bureaucrats are incompetent. When viewed from space, Oroville appears to be an occult symbol. And some people say they're not fixing the dam, but building a missile silo. And then the wackiest one I found was the real aim was to extract gold from the tailings, so they wanted to wash out everything and then re-extract it. And then they have arguments over how much of the gold you could actually recover if all of the dam material washed away, and it just gets ridiculous. So, and now in the 2 minutes I have left, so can we run over or? Okay. This is how I do it. And when I did water reporting, I broke down my stories a lot of times into these different groups, because it would be like some days I would be covering SDS, Aurora, Fountain Creek, and maybe something else, and so I had to kind of differentiate these stories into the type of story I was writing to get in the right frame of mind to even begin to write the story. So you can see my list of stories. I covered a lot of things from a governmental perspective, political. You kind of have to bow to the politics of things. It's not always the most helpful way to write a story. Sorry for all the politicians in here, but it's not always helpful. A lot of times you're explaining to them what the problem is and getting them to react. There's agency stories, and we're seeing a lot of those come out of here. There's a lot of after stories that say there was a failure to act. There's legal cases. The walnut growers in California are suing the state. There's water rights. Then they get into the kind that I kind of particularly like is the science and engineering behind these things. So I always like to do that to kind of ground people, and particularly in a story that a lot of different people are covering, I would do more science and engineering ones, which is why I kind of like Juan Brown's site. Then there's social and economic stories, and these are often the easiest to do. You just tell what's happening as it's happening. From Bill McCormick, I got this information about how many requests in Colorado there were for information on dam safety while this was going on. And the graph shows that right after the first news stories came out in February, you had a big spike, and then there was a TV report in Denver, and so there was another big spike happening there. Human interest stories are a good way to cover this. That's why I brought up Mark. I hope you were interested in Mark as a human. So, and these stories are all, I watched a lot of these while it was going on, because I could only take so much of the water coming over the dam before I go, oh man, this is terrible. But there were a lot of, the one up in the upper left corner is one of the evacuation centers. People, it became a kind of a tourist attraction when they were running all that water out of there. And then there's one where the kids got some signs and decided to thank the workers who were busting their butts to fix this. So, finally, in Reporting 101, we're going to talk about commentary, and this is forgive me, I'm running over. Am I okay on time, Doug? Okay. Okay. When I was an editor at the Chieftain, I had one reporter I remember came up to me, and I said, well, we were working on a story that had many, many facets like this one, and said, hey, can you do this and this? And he told me, no. And I said, why not? And he says, well, everybody's working on this story. I don't want to work on that story. And he was really pretty belligerent about it. He went on to become a pretty good editor, but and maybe because he was belligerent, but his attitude was, everybody else is working on this story. Why should I waste any time working on it? But you can as a reporter, I always felt you could add something to a story, and go back to those different types of stories and write about it. One of the things that's happened with this story is social media kind of took it over, and I think you're going to see that more and more. One of the goals of the California Water Resources is to try to get ahead of the media in stories like this and not let them take over the story. But that was impossible with this story. So now, if we have time, can we run the video? Okay. So this is from the California Department of Water Resources. So they put out one of those about every day or two, and I think they play that music to calm people down. Because the other videos, they're all drawing stuff on it and saying this is a conspiracy. So, anyway, yeah, if you go on the internet, just Google Oroville, look for some YouTube videos. There's hundreds of them. You'll find all you need to see there. And Mark, thank you very much for sharing with us. Any closing comments from you?
Well, I'd just say that my dad's probably the most upset because his favorite fishing spot right below the dam there is kind of hard to get to. There's some awesome fishing down there. I caught a number of those too. And then the other thing that bothers them is there's lights on 24 hours a day now, so they have to close their windows and shades. So, you know, the important things in life. But I hadn't seen that, and that was pretty eye-opening. And I think it was Kevin Reedy said yesterday that we're good at reacting to emergencies, and I really think that there's a lot of perception that the emergency was the drought before, and all the time and effort was going into the drought and the management of the drought, and there had been some negligence in keeping up with the maintenance and repairs at the dam itself, because there was a lot of old concrete that had not been maintained. Now, I can't verify that. I'm only speaking, it's more of from a perspective of somebody that lives there. And if that's true or not, I think that's all part of what they're looking into long term, but it does speak to ongoing maintenance and repair activities.
Okay, thank you.